for tonight. Oh, that's me. There's been a late change to our program. I'm pleased to inform you that our MP, Katie Allen, has been able to adjust her schedule and will be present for part of the evening, and therefore we've... let's keep it civil throughout the night, please. So thank you, Katie, for adjusting your program. And I'm doing this very much on the fly because of this adjustment. Firstly, can I remind everyone that we are meeting on Wurundjeri country, and can we remember the traditional owners and acknowledge them? The other thing I want to draw your attention to, and this is important, is the candidates will be invited to speak for a few minutes, each candidate in turn. That will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Catherine Pendry. And after that, there will be some set questions from Catherine, but then following that, we will be having questions from the audience, and the questions are to be submitted by Slido. So that's the only way we want questions, please. And there is advice on the... Speak up, please. There is advice, thank you. There is advice on the agenda on how to use the Slido. So you download the app and type in the number that's on the agenda and submit your questions, and the moderator will select questions from those submitted. So at this point, I won't say any more. We need to keep things moving. So I invite our moderator, Catherine Pendry, to come and join me. While she's coming up to the stage, I'll introduce her. She's a Fellow of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. She has a strong interest in public health. Catherine has experience working in remote regions of the Northern Territory and also in the COVID-19 clinical response in Victoria. She served on the boards of both Doctors for Environment Australia and the Climate and Health Alliance, and she's a former member of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network for the Asia Pacific. She's published a number of research papers addressing the intersection between health, equity and sustainability, and she's proud to be a Higgins local.
Hello, everyone. All right, so as you've heard, we've had a late change of the order of proceedings tonight. So we're heading straight in to the most exciting part of the evening. I'd also, before we start, like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation as the traditional owners on the land on which we're meeting tonight. Thanks to Will, the Higgins Climate Action Network, our candidates, and Malvern City Council, who have helped us to put on tonight's event. And thank you to all of you for coming. We're a sellout event tonight. Hands up if you're a Higgins local. Put them up high. Yes, that's it. Pretty much everyone. Fantastic. So I too have lived here pretty much all of my life, and I think it's a wonderful place to live. But as a passionate participant in democracy, I did always lament the fact that it wasn't a marginal seat, because I really wanted my vote to count. Well, now it is. We fixed it. And climate change is one of the main reasons. And it's the reason we're here tonight. We all have different reasons for caring about climate change. For some of us, it's the economic issues, avoiding stranded assets and taking advantage of economic opportunities. For others, it's securing a safe future for children, or the legacy we leave to our grandchildren. For others, acting on science is just the common sense thing to do. And if you're a health professional like me, you're motivated by the fact that you're seeing the mental and physical health impacts of climate change more and more every day. But whatever the reason, we know that this is the critical election in the critical decade for action on climate change. And as a marginal seat, Higgins has an important part to play in the outcome for our climate. What we do, especially in the next 2 weeks, matters. So, here we go. The way the order will now work is we're going to hear introductory comments from our candidates. They'll all have 4 minutes. They'll get a warning bell with 30 seconds to go. We're then going to have 3 set questions, and then we're going to run the questions from Slido. So I know the orders of our slides have changed, but if whoever's got the job of being in charge of them, if you can find the slide that has the Slido instructions, that would be absolutely fantastic. It's an app where you can submit questions and vote for others. If we can leave that up there, that would be fantastic. So get going with your questions now. We'll be needing them soon. Now, Dr. Katie Allen can stay with us till about 8:10 or so. So we're going to roll questions until then. At that point, we're going to take a pause, and we're going to go back to the initial order of our program and hear from our fantastic speakers for tonight. We have a youth speaker and Eytan Lenko. Then, if we haven't all, run out of steam and we've still got a bit of time on the clock, we'll see if we can squeeze in a few more wrap-up questions with the candidates that are still with us. All right. So, first up, we'll hear from Dr. Katie Allen. So Dr. Katie Allen is the sitting member for Higgins. She's a representative of the Liberal Party, and she was elected in 2019. Prior to that, she had a successful career as a paediatrician and a medical researcher and held several roles in governance and leadership. I'd like to invite you to the stage, Katie Allen. Thanks very much. Everyone, before we go any further, I'd like to ask that everyone keep it respectful tonight, all right? On a scale of Wimbledon reverence to Nick Kyrgios, we're aiming for somewhere politely in the middle. So active debate, but polite and cordial, all right? If things escalate...
Thank you so much, Wominjeka, and I'd like to pay my respects, or I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we all meet and pay my respects to leaders emerging past and present. Now, I put my hand up to run politically because, like you, I care about our community, about the country, and about the planet. And so, as the member for Higgins, I have taken a strong stand on climate action. Now, I do understand that there are many people in this room who want more climate action, and I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for the work that you are doing to raise the awareness of this important issue. And I'm proud of the things that I have managed to achieve as a backbencher in a Morrison government. The first thing to say is when I became elected in my first speech, I said that it's not just an environmental imperative to act on climate, it's an economic imperative. And in fact, I've written opinion pieces about the fact that it's actually an economic inevitability. In my view, it's all very well to say you want a target, but you need a plan to go with the target. So I've worked with many parliamentary groups in a bipartisan way to make sure that we move the government to a position of more action on climate. And I am proud of the contribution I've made with regards to committee work, joining parliamentary friendships groups on climate action, and the fact that we have now worked to a position that no longer is this country having debates about if we should act on climate. It is now a matter of how we act on climate. And that is a very important movement forward because Higgins cares deeply about climate, but the rest of the country needs to come on the journey so that we ensure that we get sustainable and sustained action. So delivery of the 2050 target, along with a plan, means that we have now got a firm footing of the country moving in the right direction. Now, I believe we need to go faster, and I've been working each and every day, including when I was asked about how we're dealing with COVID, I was constantly reminding our government, the Prime Minister, that it's not just about COVID, it's also about climate. So I'm very proud of the fact that in our plan, the Low Emissions Technology Strategy has 5 stretch targets, because if you don't have commercialisable, scalable solutions, we're not going to be able to deliver what the community needs, wants and deserves. Whether that's ensuring that we have hydrogen under $2 a kilogram, We have good batteries, which we've now invested $160 million in the great battery outside of Geelong. We have green steel, green cement, and we'll hear from Eytan Lenko later today about the great work he's doing in this particular area. Whether we have better work looking into soil carbon to make sure that's under $3 per hectare, or whether we have work on hydrogen. Australia in particular has an opportunity to lead with hydrogen. That means that we can take our sunshine and our wind, bottle it and ship it overseas. And we already have the initial agreements with places like Japan and South Korea in order to build a hydrogen-led economy for the future. Now, we've also done some great legislation with regards to developing our first offshore wind capability, which will be very important because we all know how good we are with solar, but we've been behind the curve when it comes to wind. So wind and solar as renewables, batteries for firming power, and then hydrogen for our future. That will enable us to decarbonise the different sectors that are required right across the economy, whether it's in transportation with electric vehicle strategy, which today we've announced $482,000 for 10 electric vehicle target charging stations right across Stonington and Higgins, or whether it's about delivering on recycling and waste. There's so much to do. We don't have a moment to waste, and I'm proud of the small but significant steps I have made as your voice for Higgins. There's more to do. We need to get on with it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Katie. Next up, we have Sonya Semmens. Sonya is the Greens Party candidate. She's a parent, educator, small business owner, and NGO consultant. She has over 2 decades' experience working in the not-for-profit sector and is a lifelong advocate for social justice and ecological causes. Please come up, Sonya. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land that we're on, the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. So you may not have woken up this morning thinking the fate of Australia rests on you. No pressure. Yet you, every one of you in this room, have a role to play in our future. Because you see, you are voters in the Greens' most winnable Liberal-held seat in the country, which means you are the seat who can replace a climate obstacle with someone who is a climate advocate, 20 years in the NGO sector in defence of lives and livelihoods. You have, here in Higgins, an opportunity and a responsibility to our children. On a hot day in January 2020, I caught the tram home from work. I caught the tram through the city, down Collins Street, through a thick haze of smoke. We all remember that week when the bushfires blanketed the East Coast in smoke, so thick you could look straight at the sun. My tram goes past my children's school, so I got off at the last stop and I picked up my children from their school and we walked across the road to our home. We closed the door against the smoke and my daughter said to me, "Mum, can you come up to my room to talk?" Which is a big deal when you're 8. So we went up the stairs to her room. She sat me down on the bed and she closed the door and she said, she'd heard somewhere that 50-degree days were going to be the new normal and she was scared. She doesn't like the heat and she has friends who have asthma. And I said to her, I hugged her and I said, "Don't worry, the adults are onto it." And she hugged me back and I knew this kid does not believe me. She's seen the smoke, the fires, and since then the floods. She's seen Attenborough. They all have, our kids, and they're looking to us to see what are we going to do about it. I'll tell you what we're going to do about it. The Greens are going to set targets in line with the science. not with Liberal and Labor's fossil fuel donors, in line with the science, a 75% reduction of emissions by 2030, and we'll legislate it this year. The day after the election, no new coal and gas. We'll sell sunshine to our neighbours instead, and we'll deliver our children a clean, green and resilient economy, and we'll save our country, and we'll save their future. We're less than 3 weeks away from an election, so my campaign is at the pointy end. You may have heard the Greens talking about wanting to push the next government to go further and faster on climate. Higgins, I can be that push. Labor has sided with the Liberals to approve 114 new coal and gas mines. Without us, they're not even coming close to addressing the climate crisis. Unless you have a plan to end coal and gas, you do not have a plan for climate. The IPCC report has been clear. An atlas of human suffering. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said, "We're heading toward an unlivable world." That's what Labor and Liberals' policies will get us, both over 3 degrees and unlivable world. We don't have one electoral cycle to waste, and you are the adults in the room. You, the voters of the Greens' most winnable held seat in the entire country, you are the adults in the room. Tell your friends, tell your neighbours, so that above all, you can tell your children the adults are onto it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonya. Next up, we have Dr. Michelle Ananda-Rajah. She's the ALP candidate. Michelle's an infectious diseases specialist and general physician at a major Melbourne hospital who also has a distinguished career as a medical researcher. During the pandemic, she co-founded Healthcare Workers Australia, an organisation dedicated to improving the safety of clinicians during the pandemic. Thank you, Michelle.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the organisers for inviting me. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I look forward to being part of a Labor government that delivers voice, treaty and truth to our nation. This is the unfinished business of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been a frontline doctor for 25 years. I've worked 13 years in one of the busiest hospitals in the country, the Alfred. I've been at a few emergencies, all right? Code blues and pre-arrest situations. Rather than telling you what I do at these scenarios, I'll tell you what I don't do. I don't stand around making announcements, all right? Wouldn't go down too well. I act with urgency and I act with purpose. And the same can be said for our country. Our nation has warmed to 1.4 degrees. We are at the front line of climate change and we are seeing intensifying impacts of climate. At an individual level, I would say that I am seeing eco-anxiety morph into something far more sinister, what I can only describe as a lethal hopelessness, both amongst young people and older people. And why has this happening? This is happening because of the climate wars that we have had in this country for the last 15 years. And what has the Morrison-Joyce government done about it? Shameless inaction. That is what they have done, all right? This government went to Glasgow and returned with the ignominious title of Australia being labelled the colossal fossil. Let me tell you what a Labor government will do. We are committing to decarbonising this country and we will do it sector by sector, targeting transport, electricity generation and industry. These account for 80% of all our emissions. With transport, it's about making electric vehicles more affordable and supporting them with a national infrastructure of charging stations. With electricity, it's really about bringing online large-scale renewable projects that have been gathering dust on Angus Taylor's desk. Why? Because we do not have the high voltage infrastructure that needs to be built. Cables as thick as my arm need to go online, and we have 20 billion to rewire the nation. With respect to industry, industry is tricky. Australia has carbon-intensive industries, mining, oil and gas. We are setting pollution limits, and these will be ratcheted down. In fact, industry wants this sort of planning signal, and it will be linked to a carbon trading scheme and offsets. This is the kind of certainty our country needs, all right? We need to end the climate wars and move forward. In addition to all of this, we will be legislating net zero by 2050. This is not an empty pledge from a Prime Minister who takes liberties with the truth, all right? This is a pledge which means that Chris Bowen every year will stand up in front of the Australian people and will explain to them how we are monitoring and tracking our climate performance. That's what legislating net zero means. It means accountability. There are also going to be billions of dollars spent, if not trillions. It's going to be messy, it's going to be costly to get us to net zero. And believe me, it is a race. It is imperative that we shut the door on the scandalous rorts and waste of the Morrison-Joyce era. And by the end of this year, you will have a National Anti-Corruption Commission, one with teeth and reach. There are three critical bottlenecks that must be solved, and we have plans for all three of them. The first is a skills crisis, the second is industrial capability, and the third is workforce participation. This refers to getting women back to work because childcare costs have increased 41% under the Morrison-Joyce government, okay? Unless you address these critical bottlenecks, nothing will happen, and we have plans for all three of them. The last thing I will say is this. We must unify this country. We must unify Higgins with the Hunter, Higgins with Gladstone. Otherwise, we will not progress. And there is only one government that will do that, and it is a Labor government. All right, we are not walking both sides of the road here. Those guys have torn up net zero. They are in open warfare. We are not going to do that. In fact, we have a precedent of large-scale consensus agreements. It happened under Hawke, and it was called the Accord. We will do that again, and we will unify this country and take the whole nation forward together.
Thank you very much, Michelle. All right, last up we have Andrew Johnson. Andrew's lived in Higgins almost his whole life. He works as a swim teacher and has been significantly involved in community environmental groups, working to improve business sustainability. He also holds an honours degree in film and TV production and has worked in diverse fields, including education, the arts, and agriculture. Adding to those experiences, he's recently also become a parent. Please welcome Andrew.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, braving the cold weather to come out on a night like this. I'll start by acknowledging the people who have cared for this land and successfully done that for many, many, many more years than we've managed to by any acknowledgement. So the Boonwurrung people and the legacy that they have left for us. When it comes to climate policy and action and issues, it's a complex area in many ways, but for us, really it can be quite a simple issue. Do you follow the evidence? Do you listen to the experts? And how much? Because really, it's not our ideas that we're looking at. No one on the Higgins ballot is a climate expert in their own right. It's not our role to provide the answers. It's people who are far more expert and dedicated and knowledgeable in that area. What you're looking for when you vote is not an ideas maker. You're voting for a decision taker on your behalf. And the decision that we've made at Reason is that we will put following evidence-based policy that is driven by data, by science, and by expertise at the forefront of everything that we do. And nowhere is that more important. Nowhere is that more important, more vital, and more of the moment than climate action. That's where we need to see it the most. That choice has led us to our policies that include things like no more subsidies for fossil fuel. That was an easy decision. Throwing public money at making the problem worse is not a good way to go. That was an easy decision to make. Policies like no new coal and gas. We can't be making this problem bigger. Again, not a difficult decision for us to make if you follow the evidence and if you listen. Policies like a rapid transition to 100% renewable energy. And that one's the big one, because there are a lot of issues and there are a lot of areas that are affecting our climate, but energy is the big one. If we don't get energy right, we're not going to get there with any of them. We've got to get on top of energy. It's got to be renewable, and we've got to be going at it quickly. There is a plan for that, and we need to follow it. It's not going to be our plan, it's got to be the experts' plan. We're not telling other people what to do, we're listening, and I think that's very vital. Once you've got energy sorted, then you open the door to all sorts of other interesting things, like the advantages you can get from having put in infrastructure, incentives and support for uptake of electric vehicles, and phasing out the sale of new petrol vehicles so that we can change our transport industry. That's another big one. These policies and a whole lot of others that I haven't got the time to rattle off all at you tonight, but you can find them on our website, are sitting under the umbrella and the guiding idea of targeting net zero emissions by 2030, the expert-informed, the data-driven target by 2030 or sooner, which is important because we can get there sooner. And when you talk to people out on the street or at protests and visuals or in rooms like this, you know that we can get there quicker because people are ready. They just want the opportunity. The people of Australia will get up and do the work for this if we have the opportunity for them. I've also been really heartened and pleased to see that this year a lot of the climate organisations, when making their policy scorecards, have looked at political donations to factor your climate score. That is critical because we've got to look at how we got here, moving in a direction that is not in the interests and not what the public want. But there is a plan for that. Just like everything else that I've talked about as issue, there's a plan that the experts have signed off on that has got data behind it, it's got evidence behind it, and we're ready to follow it. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Yes, fantastic, great. All right, thank you, everyone. So now we have our 3 set questions that have been put forward by the organising committee from Higgins Climate Action Network that I'll ask to our candidates. They have 2 minutes each to answer, and if they're still going at that point, you'll hear the chime. You can also submit questions on Slido, so you just type in this website and put in that number and you'll be able to submit questions and vote for others, so please make sure that you do that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Katie Allen will be with us until 8:15ish, so we'll roll with questions until then, and at that point we'll take a pause, return to our speakers, and then return to questioning. Okay, everybody, first question. The Climate Council says for Australia to contribute its fair share to the world's efforts to keep warming well below 2 degrees, we must reduce our emissions by 75% below 2005 levels by 2030, and achieve net zero by 2035. What are your party's emission reduction targets for 2030 and 35? Or well, let's just say, what are your party's emission reduction targets and why? And we might start with you, Katie Allen, and we'll come right to left.
Thank you very much. So our party's position is net zero by 2050 and for 26 to 28% by 2030, but we project it'll be between 35 and 38%.
So the Greens are in line with the science. You know, our party position is that we will achieve 75 by 2030 and net zero by 2035. And we're doing that because obviously coal and gas and fossil fuels are the key cause of the climate crisis. And as the IPCC report has said, in fact, to quote, the number of human deaths globally will be directly correlative with how fast we get out of fossil fuels. So quite literally lives depend on the decisions we make here in Australia, which means quite literally lives depend on the outcome of this election.
Let me start by saying that I sense the urgency here. I know you all want us to go faster and higher. I get it. If there was a button to press that will take us to a renewable energy future tomorrow, I would have pressed it, all right? I promise you. Our independent modelling, right, has shown that we will achieve an interim target at 2030 of 43%. Now, this target is actually completely aligned with the targets, the interim targets of several large economies that are comparable to us. The US sitting at 50 to 55%, the EU at 55%, Canada at 40 to 45%. So the Australian Labor Party's interim target of 43% is entirely keeping with other peer countries. What I would say about the Liberal Party, however, is that they are not going to achieve net zero by 2050. In fact, I've read their report. It only gets you down to 85%. The rest of that 15% is wishful thinking and based on some sort of technology that may or may not be invented. So it is not actually going to get us to net zero by 2050. And as for the Liberal Party's interim target of 30%, that is entirely based on the actions of the state and territory governments. All right, there is no federal lever being pulled to achieve their interim target, projected interim target of 30%. Their target is actually 26 to 28% based on Tony Abbott's target. All right, it's an absolute disgrace. For a country like ours with an abundance, if not an embarrassment of natural resources, solar, wind, geothermal, indeed wave energy, we should be doing a whole lot better. But as I said to you, to get there, we need to overcome those bottlenecks. The most critical bottleneck is to unify this nation and to leave no one behind, to take Higgins along with the Hunter, Higgins along with Gladstone. If we don't do this, if we alienate these coal mining communities, we will lose our mandate to transition.
We want to target zero by 2030, net zero by 2030 or sooner, because we can. It's doable and there is no good reason not to do it if you can. We need to be moving quickly on this, and it's what the community wants. Every poll tells us, and as I said before, the community is ready to go to work and do this and rise to the occasion. All it needs is the chance and the leadership to allow that to happen. And we'll start with energy because it's the big one and move through like that, but the plans are there and we can, so we should.
Right, thank you everyone. Our next question from Higgins CAN, and this time we'll move left to right, so Andrew, you're up first. The International Energy Agency says for the world to achieve net zero by 2050, there can be no more fossil fuel investment and no more investment in new unabated coal power plants. But Australia has well over 100 coal, gas and oil projects, as well as several gas basins that are under development, several of them with government support. How can we view state and federal government emission reduction pledges as genuine when such large-scale expansion is planned?
That's a good question. How can we? No new coal and gas, as we said at the top of that. That should be what we're looking at doing. If you're trying to bring down emissions, but you're digging more of the stuff up and pulling more out of the ground, you're not getting serious about it. Right at the top of the policies that I talked about is to stop the approval and the beginnings of new projects like that. We need to be doing the work towards renewables. We can do it, but in simple terms, we should be following the top half of that question and not the bottom half, I think.
Thanks for the question, Catherine. The Labor Party's position on this is that we are not committing public money to new coal and gas projects unless the public sector is willing to fund them. Now, what does that actually mean? It means that it's got to meet certain environmental, standards, which have been watered down by the Morrison-Joyce government. We will tighten them up, and it has to make economic sense. Now, let's talk about the economics of this. A few days ago, the CEO of Macquarie Group, right, actually publicly said that they are divesting of coal. They will exit coal in 2 years, 2024. The fund manager of the largest investment fund in the world, BlackRock, has said that they will exit coal this year, right? The market has moved. The market has moved. Just talking about it is not going to hasten this. It's already happening. So it makes no sense for the Labor Party to talk about, opening up new coal mines when these mines will be open for 30 to 40 years if they go ahead. And in 30 to 40 years, and 30 years, we have to be at net zero. So I don't see how the two are compatible. On the matter of, political donations, I'm sure this will come up, of fossil fuel subsidies. Yes, we do take donations from fossil fuel companies, but we also take donations from renewable energy companies. Did you know that? We do. And look what we came up with. It's called the Powering Australia Plan. This is all about renewable energy. Nowhere in this document does it have opening up coal or prolonging gas. Nowhere. All right? So this is an inert document right now, but to breathe life into this means that you have to step through a portal on May 21 and decide whether you want business as usual under the Morrison-Joyce government, who will continue to pollute forever, or whether you want something better.
Well, I think the truth is that both of the major parties will prolong coal and gas because they've both approved 114 new coal and gas projects. That's not even just to allow the existing projects to continue, but have approved another 114, including, of course, Beetaloo up in the Galilee Basin, which will contribute an additional 13% of emissions, and in fact, whole countries' worth of emissions into the atmosphere. So, if you don't have a plan to get out of coal and gas, then you don't have a plan for the climate. And we know, of course, why that is. And it's because both of the major parties take a substantial amount of money from the fossil fuel industry. Indeed, almost $500,000 each, and Labor a little bit more in disclosed donations in the last year, and $1 billion in undisclosed donations over the last decade. So we don't have time for this. This electorate has an opportunity to send an MP to Parliament who will immediately ban those new coal and gas mines, a moratorium on all new coal and gas, so that we can create a plan toward net zero that actually brings us within cooey of the margins. The era of new coal and gas is behind us. The world is calling on us to make that decision in line with our COP26 agreements, and it sits in your hands as to whether or not you elect an MP who will do that, or whether you elect an MP from the major parties who will just open new coal and gas and proceed with Galilee. And we don't have time for that.
So with the greatest respect, Sonya, I'm pretty sure you have to be part of 76 people who have to make a decision. You're not actually able to make a decision as an individual when it comes to legislating in our parliament. And that is our democracy, whether you like it or not. I'm just saying that actually our democracy is 76 people need to come together. One person cannot make a decision. You need to actually be part of a government to make a decision, or a Greens Labor government that might make a decision together. What I would say is that I believe in technology, and the fact that if you look at the wicked problems of the world, science and technology has been able to come together to solve it. And if you look at what's happened with COVID, the best scientists in the world came together in order to provide protection through vaccination at a speed no one had ever seen before. And if you look at science for climate, you can see, for instance, solar panels used to be prohibitively expensive. We're now looking at ultra low-cost solar of $15 a megawatt. The same is true for hydrogen. At the moment, it's incredibly expensive. We need to get it under $2 a kilogram so that we can have hydrogen cars. There's already 25 hydrogen cars in Australia, but hydrogen buses, hydrogen freight, because we have a big continent, and even though we're all pro-EV, and we are pro giving charging stations infrastructure, we will need to have a future fuel strategy, which we do already have with our federal government, a future fuel strategy that enables both electric vehicles and hydrogen for the future. So I know that the free market and private equity is bringing the solutions at speed. I also know, having sat on the Trade and Investment Growth Committee in Parliament with a report recently, which shows it is no longer viable for private equity to invest in fossil fuels. We can see that already happening, and we can see that private equity is moving away because they know the writing is on the wall. It will be a slower transition than some would like, but we are indeed globally in the middle of transition away from fossil fuels, and that is being led by private equity and enabled by government.
Thanks, Katie. And just checking you have time for one more question before you have to head off? Yep, fantastic, great. All right, so picking up on something that's come up a couple of times already in the discussion tonight, and again was in our questions from Higgins CAN, there's been a lot of discussion about the role of transparency and accountability in government, and particularly about the potential role for some kind of anti-corruption body. I'd like all of our candidates to comment on what reforms they could see as potentially improving the transparency and accountability in our political system, and feel free to reflect specifically on climate change in the fossil fuel industry. We know in Australia, and it has come up tonight, that fossil fuel companies have donated millions to Australian political parties and in return received billions in subsidies. So we might start in the middle this time. Michelle, if you'd like to go first. Thank you.
One of my favourite topics, integrity in politics. So I can tell you that you will get a National Anti-Corruption Commission delivered by the end of the year, should Labor form government on May 22. This is incredibly important, right, for the energy transition, because billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, of public and private money is going to go towards actually taking us to net zero. We estimate that 76 billion will be spent based on our modelling to get us to our 2030 targets. 26 billion will be public money, the rest will be private money. Now, this Anti-Corruption Commission will have all the powers of a standing royal commission. It will have retrospective powers as well as prospective powers. It will have the ability to bring anyone forward, from a minister down to a staffer, an agency, external agency, or a contractor. And it will be led by Mark Dreyfus. Mark Dreyfus, for those of you who don't know him, has previously been an Attorney General of this country. He is also a QC. And there will be public hearings. Yes, public hearings will occur. So, this is incredibly important. I just want to take one thing. This notion of 114 oil and gas projects or coal and gas projects being approved is not true. These are provisions of licenses to explore, but as far as from our point of view, we have not approved them to full kind of operational status. So I think we just need to clarify that.
Thanks. We might go to you next, Sonya. Thanks.
Well, the Greens, obviously, we first tabled a bill for a federal ICAC about 10 years ago, and Larissa again tabled it in the Senate a couple of years ago in 2019 too. So we are in full support of a federal anti-corruption commission with teeth, both retrospective and going forward. And we add to that another measure of protection of democracy, which I think is really important, which is rigorous donations reform. So at the moment, obviously, the Greens, as you may know, have a policy we don't take donations from Big Pharma or any kind of fossil fuel company or multinational or anyone with a vested interest. And that's a position that's really simple. You get big money and nefarious money out of politics so that your government serves you not its fossil fuel donors. So yeah, I think that's really critical.
So I'm a strong supporter of the Commonwealth Integrity Commission and have been working with Michaela Cash, the Attorney General, on developing our position. We have over 300 pages of a draft and $100 million put aside in the last budget for a Commonwealth Integrity Commission. In my view, there needs to be some additional changes, and I've made my position public on that. If you look at Transparency Australia's website, it has a very interesting and useful graph to look at all the different types of ICACs or IBACs that are available at the state level, and provides an oversight of where Commonwealth Integrity Commission model sits. And there are two parts to it. There's the law enforcement arm, and then there's the public service and parliamentary arm. And at the moment, in my view, the parliamentary arm is too far to the left, and I'd like to move it more to the right on the scale. And that includes being allowed for referrals, and also to have public hearings when it's appropriate.
Just incidentally, Australia also got its worst score by Transparency International last year, right, under the Morrison government, the worst score. So, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. These guys talk a lot, but they do not deliver. And Morrison is running away from his responsibility.
An ICAC is important, and ICAC is vital. It's embarrassing that the federal level is the level of our government with the weakest anti-corruption legislation and oversight in the whole country. All the states have something better. Something that also all the states do better is political donation restrictions and laws. The federal level is the weakest in the entire country, which is just a ridiculous situation to be in. We want to go further than I think almost any other party in Australia at the moment. We want political donations to end. It shouldn't just be some industries that can't put the money in politicians' pockets. It should be no one can put money in politicians' pockets. As soon as you can get a politician in debt to you, you're inviting corruption. It's always going to be there. It should be off the table entirely. It's also going to combat the phenomena of whoever spends the most money winning elections, which unfortunately statistics show us really happens. As much as we like to think we'd be able to see through it, the data tells us that we don't. And when one group is able to spend much, much more than another, it does not serve democracy well. If everyone's on the level playing field, then the message has to win it. Your record has to win it, the things that are really supposed to matter in democracy. We have to have political donation law as well as an ICAC to take a medical metaphor on a stage full of doctors. Prevention is always better than a cure. So we need to have that in there. On top of that, just to add in a few more quick ones, we want ministerial diaries to be public so that we know who is being met with and who isn't being met with. We also want to cut down on the revolving door of jobs going from government to industry that they had responsibility for and that sort of backroom dealing. And it must be enforceable. The Code of Conduct bans it, but they just do it if they want to. It must be enforceable. Parliament has shown us that we can't rely on them to enforce their own rules anymore. There has to be something above it, unfortunately.
Can I just make a point? Seeing as we're talking about political donations, our policy is to lower the donation threshold to $1,000. It's currently sitting at about $14,500 thereabouts, and we would also like to see real-time disclosure of political donations.
So sorry, Michelle, that was a disclosure threshold, not a donation threshold? Yeah. I just didn't hear clearly.
Right, thanks everyone. So at this point in our evening, we're unfortunately going to have to say goodbye to Dr. Katie Allen, who we thank for joining us for the time that she could at the last minute.
I'm sorry, but I have actually had organised I had 3 events tonight. I've made time to come here. And
everybody, thanks.
You're
thanks
very welcome
much,
to send
everybody.
me an email or send me a phone or give me a phone call. Any of those things, very welcome to do that. And just to be clear, I have made time. I've asked for it to be a different date and time, and it wasn't.
All right, thanks everybody. As I said, we're keeping it polite and cordial. We thank Dr. Katie Allen for joining us tonight. We are now going to invite our MC, Dr. Will Howard, back to the stage, and he's going to introduce our keynote for this evening. If our candidates are all comfortable, I'll ask you to stay up on the stage, and we'll recommence questions after we've heard from our keynote. So everybody keep please entering things into Slido. Thank you very much.
Right. Okay. Now, further to political donations, can I point out that Higgins Climate Action Network would be very grateful if you would make a donation. As you can imagine, it takes a chunk of money to organise events like this. It takes a chunk of money to continue our activities, and it's very clear that we're going to need climate activism to continue for quite some time yet, regardless of the result of this election. So, I invite you to look on your agenda, and we will have donation buckets if you've got cash on you, but if you haven't, don't worry. You can do it right now on your phone. There's a QR code that says donate. That will take you in to the Higgins CAN donate site. It's called Shuff. I know it works on the phone because I did it with mine yesterday. Now, I confess, I donated $18. Now, that is not enough, is it? I want you to make me feel ashamed. I want you to make me feel mean. I want you to donate now and show me up, okay? And now in all of that excitement, I've almost forgotten where I am. So I think what we'll do at this stage, we have some keynote speakers. The first of them is Eytan Lenko, who's been very patient waiting through the change program. Eytan is an engineer. He's an entrepreneur. He was happy to assure me earlier tonight that he's not a doctor, so we're a bit doctor heavy tonight. He's a renewables industry thought leader. He's a co-founder and director of Infrastructure Access Managers, and he's a former chair of Beyond Zero Emissions. I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak, Eytan.
Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Hopefully this keynote works just as well as a mid-note. So as you heard, my background's in technology. I'm a software engineer, and I founded a software company in 2009 that grew to employ over 250 people. But that same year, 2009, I began to become concerned about climate change. And as an engineer, it seemed to me that there must be technology that we could put towards solving climate change. And that at some point, it was also crystal clear that we were going to have to deploy it at the speed and scale required to deal with the climate crisis. But literally, I couldn't find any information around about how to do it. In 2009, there really wasn't a lot of practical research. So eventually, I came across a group of legends that were trying to put together a new organisation called Beyond Zero Emissions. And their aim was to bring together engineers and experts to do the actual hard work that government wasn't doing at the time and show how we could power Australia with 100% renewable electricity. So I volunteered with them and I helped produce the Stationary Energy Plan, which was the very first plan in Australia that showed how we could do it in detail. It was launched by Malcolm Turnbull in Sydney Town Hall in front of 1,200 people. And that day the conversation moved on from it's not possible to what level of investment was required, which was a big step forward. I went on to join the board and chair BZE until the end of last year, and we went on to develop plans that showed how we could decarbonise each sector of the economy in a way that creates jobs and prosperity for Australia. And during COVID, BZE created the Million Jobs Plan, which showed how Australia could recover from the economic crisis we were in by accelerating decarbonisation through activities like rolling out renewables and transmission, a zero energy bills home retrofit program, modernising Australian manufacturing, and doing renewable mining in Australia. We worked to present the Prime Minister with a concrete list of projects and initiatives where a small amount of government investment would unlock billions in private investment. And through all of that, I've learned that the climate crisis isn't just something that we need to step up to protect our way of life and ensure that we have a livable planet. It's also an unbelievable economic opportunity, especially for Australia, which is the sunniest and windiest country in the world. And at a high level, you know, we talk about climate change a lot and it sounds super complicated, but at the highest level, the solution is pretty simple. We need to electrify everything and we need to power it all with renewables, and we also need to deal with agriculture. The great news is that we already have most of the technology that we need to do that. We just have to work out to deploy it at the speed and scale that we require. And that's where governments can step in, and that should be the top priority of all governments. The world we're moving to is one of energy prosperity. The old story that we used to tell ourselves was a story about sacrifice, about less, driving less, flying less, doing everything less. But where we're actually heading, you know, is a world where we can access clean energy at incredible scale at an extremely low cost. And that will be a world where Victoria and Australia are more secure. Currently, Victorian homes in particular are reliant on volatile gas for their heating and hot water. And we've seen how volatile gas can be with the crisis in Russia and Ukraine. Our transport fleet is dependent on imported oil. Our manufacturers rely on gas to source their heat. And all of these things can now be economically transformed to run on cheap renewable electricity that we generate right here in Victoria. And the really big vision is for Australia to become a renewable energy superpower. And that's where we use an abundance of cheap electricity to become the natural home of energy-intensive industry to do things such as manufacturing steel, aluminium and hydrogen, and exporting those products out to the world. Nobody knows this better than the New South Wales Treasurer now, Matt Keane, who's shown leadership to transform New South Wales from a laggard in this space to a leader, so we know it can be done. He recently said that half the world's wealth is being created in jurisdictions that have committed to net zero, and so those markets that have previously underwritten our prosperity are changing. And we want to make sure that we're well placed to take advantage of the global megatrends in a way that will create jobs, drive investment, and underwrite prosperity. And that's a great vision for our country. But make no mistake that we're in a race. Australia has a head start with our natural advantages, but other countries in the world are moving fast. Sweden is already making green steel. Germany, the home of the auto industry, just hit 45% of new car sales being some form of pluggable electric car. These next few years are going to be critical as to whether Australia will take a leading role and benefit from a new clean economy or be left behind. But I don't know why I'm telling all of you guys that, because YouGov recently polled Higgins residents. I don't know if you've seen this polling. They polled Higgins residents on their attitudes towards climate. And they found that 77% of Higgins residents support action on climate change. 75% said that action on climate change would benefit our economy. And 70% think that preventing climate change will be good for their health. And when asked what solutions Higgins residents wanted governments to prioritise, they said replacing gas and coal power stations with renewables, investing in clean transport, stronger federal laws to make forests and soils healthier, putting public money towards renewable energy and storage and not coal and gas projects, powering all government buildings with renewable energy, and investing in making products for export such as steel, aluminium and hydrogen from renewables. So, congratulations to all of you for being so forward-thinking, and the polling clearly shows that. And we've heard from a bunch of our candidates. I'm looking forward to continuing to hearing from them on how they're going to support the will of Higgins residents. Thank you for having me.
Our speakers. The organisers of tonight have asked me to clarify that extensive efforts were undertaken with Katie Allen's office to organise tonight around her schedule. All right, in light of that, for our next question, I'd like all of our candidates here on stage to reflect on your party's voting record on climate change and effectiveness in implementing effective emissions reductions policies. We'll start with you, Sonya. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this gives me an opportunity to clarify a point about the power that a Greens MP can have in the Parliament, which is that with one extra lower house Greens MP in the Parliament, we hold, on current numbers, the balance of power. So you don't need to have 76 people, you just need one extra. For instance, an MP for Higgins, who holds the balance of power and can set the terms of Parliament. I say those terms are net zero by 2035 and 75 by 2030. I also say no new coal and gas. Now, in terms of the Greens' record in the Parliament, obviously, we're the Greens. We're the party that have been talking about legislating climate and environment issues for over 30 years. I'm really proud of our legislative history, and I'm really proud of the impact that we made. When we held the balance of power last time in 2011 through 2014, along with Julia Gillard, we were able to get across the floor of the Parliament Australia's only emissions trading scheme, which was the only time in Australia's history that emissions have meaningfully fallen. That was a highly successful ETS, and that's exactly the sort of scheme that we need to see again, where there's a tax on polluters to fund the transition that we need to move from the emissions that we have now to net zero. So we have a long history of mining in this country, and those wonderful communities have kept the power on in Australia for over 100 years. We owe them our thanks, and we owe them a plan. And a tax on polluters will help us ensure that we can fund that transition plan. The Greens policy is a $19 billion transition plan, and Adam's been around the country talking with communities about it already. And the very strong message that we have is that they know that coal and gas is on the decline, that these are industries that, whether we like it or not, are dying. And mostly they're incredibly thankful that someone's finally telling them the truth and offering them a really serious plan so that their communities continue to thrive.
Let me start by saying, if you don't know your history, you are condemned to repeat it. It was Kevin Rudd who introduced the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme. This was the precursor to an emissions trading scheme. And there was a lot of squabbling and quibbling over the number, and it was the Greens who voted it down, and it was a catastrophe for this country. We are repeating history again, right now. We are talking about 2030 targets, 43%, 75%, 30%, whatever. The reality is that Australia is coming from a standing start. We are the colossal fossil, and we need to get moving. Yes, there is an economic imperative. Yes, there is an environmental imperative, but there is now also a time imperative. And ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of time. We have run out of time with the Morrison-Joyce government. There is only one party that stands ready now to form government, and we are the only party with a credible, sensible, workable plan that has won endorsement from key stakeholders in this country. Stakeholders that we need to have on side: the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, the National Farmers Federation, the Australian Chamber of Commerce. They have endorsed this plan. We are the only party with an endorsement from these bodies. And we can talk about raising ambition, and I love the idea of raising ambition. But what I really love even more is a plan to meet that kind of target and meet that ambition. As I said to you before, if you are not talking about addressing the skills crisis in this country or industrial capability, which Eytan talked about, manufacturing, right? We need to manufacture the products we need to decarbonise and the rest of the world needs. We have $15 billion tucked away for a national reconstruction fund, which is focused not on basic manufacturing. We're not talking about making paper clips. We're going to be making the solar panels we need, the wind turbines that we need, the batteries. In fact, Australia is the largest producer of lithium. We sell it for $3,000 a tonne. We buy it back as a $14,000 Tesla battery. We buy it back as a $60,000 electric vehicle. These things need to now be made in Australia. In fact, we had a car industry in this country. Do you remember? And it was waved away by Joe Hockey in 2017. It was a catastrophe because we missed the electric vehicle wave. I fervently want to see cars being made in this country again. The workforce is there. The political will is there on our side of the fence. Now we need you to make this a reality.
Just to clarify, can I clarify? The Greens voted down a CPRS that would have locked in no emissions reduction until 2050 and continued to subsidise fossil fuel until 2050. We felt it was a devastating... I disagree completely. It would have locked in no emissions reduction. That's the law. It would have prevented no emissions reduction until 2050, and we successfully negotiated a CPRS just a few years later.
Just ask members of the audience to please remain polite and only interject appropriately. All right, over to you, Andrew.
All right, I'll check. Is this mic working? It is now.
It is.
It's
You're obviously better at working them than I am.
I've got it going. I guess as the only representative on this stage of a party that doesn't currently have a federal member, this question wasn't submitted with me in mind, I suppose. I can say that we've never voted against our community's interests. On a more serious note, though, what I can talk about is our record at state level, where we, as a party, Reason has got so much legislation across the board with only one seat held that wasn't on the radar of any of the parties that had larger numbers there. There is no party that has a better record of actually getting things done that wasn't going to be done if we weren't there in Australia at the moment, and I don't think in Australia's history. So if you feel like the people who have seats and have positions in Parliament haven't done enough on the issues you want, our record says that we're a pretty good option for getting those things done.
Can I just add one thing? I think we need to just stand back a moment and just understand the scale of the transformation this country is about to go through. All right, the energy transformation or the energy transition to a renewable future is the greatest economic opportunity, right, since the Industrial Revolution for Australia. Now, we are currently sitting, it's like an S-shaped curve, like this, right? We're currently sitting here, but we're about to go up, and we're going to go up steeply, and then we're going to flatten. And you can take the example of electric vehicles. We're starting with new car sales of 2.5%, some of the lowest sales in the OECD,
Thanks,
a club
Michelle.
of rich
We'll get
countries.
you to wrap it up.
But we're going to go up, and with our projections, we estimate that we will hit 89% new car sales, electric vehicles by 2030. That is a massive transformation, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think people here really understand that. By 2030, we will
thanks
also
very much,
reach
Michelle.
82%
We might return to
renewable
the
energy.
questions. All right, we've had a couple of questions in the chat about refugee policy, given the effects of climate change in the Asia Pacific and in our near neighbours. And I might also extend that to international relations and security, given the recent events in the Asia Pacific. So I'd ask you all to reflect specifically on how climate change is affecting our relationship with the Asia Pacific, particularly a focus on refugee policy, but feel free to comment more broadly on national security and foreign relations. Now we might start with you, Andrew.
All right, first up on this one. Start with refugees. Our refugee policy and our refugee history is a disgrace. It embarrasses and upsets me. That has to change. That really has to change. We are going to see, we've seen refugees of war and economic refugees, if you like, but we are going to see climate refugees. We probably already are seeing some of the islands that form part of our corner of the world are really feeling this bite in a way that we aren't yet. We're feeling it in some way, but they know way, way better what's coming than we do. We need to be doing our bit. To put it sort of simply, we need to be standing up to our obligations under international law and under moral obligation to do better than we are doing, and I think that's pretty well known. In terms of international relations more generally, I mean, the climate point of this is that a lot gets talked about Australians' emissions and things like that, but it's a global issue. There is no invisible line drawn between us and the rest of the world when it comes to global emissions. Cooperation has to be part of that. Linking up and working as a united species has to be part of that. Humans are at their best when they cooperate. We don't do that well individually. The pandemic has shown that for a lot of us, that we find that being individual doesn't work so well. The history of humanity of when we've done our best is when we work together, and focusing on divisions between each other and competing and saying they're not doing as much so we shouldn't do as much is just the opposite way that we should be approaching these sort of things. Yeah, so I guess at its heart, in foreign relations and foreign dealings, it's got to be about looking at the shared human experience. It's something that's coming for all of us and something that is going to do harm and sadness to all of us, and we've got to connect on that human level of wanting something better for our world. Is there anything that's more universally human than wanting something better for planet Earth?
Refugee policy is currently a complete mess under this government, and it's been getting worse. Now, this is a matter which is close to my heart. My ancestry is Sri Lankan Tamil, and I am the same ancestry as the Biloela family, the Murugapans. Now, it is simply a lottery of life that I've ended up where I am, and they are where they are. And, you know, a Labor government will reset this. We will, Christina Kennelly has said that she will return the Biloela family back to Biloela. And we will abolish indefinite detention. It will just not happen, all right? There will still be processing time required, but indefinite detention will not occur. With respect to climate and refugees, this is what I'll say. We have 10 million people on our doorstep in the Pacific. And for them, their number one national security issue is climate. It's accelerating climate. And the problem here is that it is not just an abstract existential crisis, it is an acute existential crisis to these communities. They don't want to leave their communities, they want to stay where they are. But they are contending not only with inundation, but also with saltwater incursion. And once saltwater contaminates fresh water, it is curtains, it's game over. Now they look to us as a country that is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we are, 8th richest country per capita in the world, right? Built on fossil fuels. We are a fossil fuel giant. And this is why in this country we are unable to have a rational debate about exiting oil, coal and gas, because our wealth depends on coal and gas. It is our number 2 and number 3 exports. So what I would say is that we are taking climate change seriously. Anthony Albanese has also said that he wants to host the Conference of Parties in 2024 with the Pacific Island nations. And this will be not only a symbolic attempt to build bridges again with our neighbours, but also to demonstrate that Australia, as a prodigal daughter, is returning to the fold. That wasn't the question asked by Catherine, but I'm happy to answer it.
Yeah, you're welcome to respond.
We will be maintaining offshore detention and boat turnbacks. With offshore detention, there are around 230 people left. Those 230 people could have been resettled in New Zealand had this Morrison government actually upheld the agreement that Julia Gillard made with New Zealand, and they didn't. Instead, they were left languishing. We do not believe that there will be many people, if any people, left. Actually, Anthony Albanese has said that. He does not believe that there will be any people left in offshore detention, but boat turnbacks will remain. Why? Because when people travel by boat, they die. And you can look at these numbers on the Monash Border Observatory. Monash University have collated this information. It is for anyone to look at. And personally, I don't want people getting on boats crossing to Australia because they do die, and it also puts our naval seamen and women at risk. So, you know, the other thing I will say to this is that there needs to be a regional solution to our management of refugees, and that has been lacking by this government because they have dropped the ball on foreign policy. We will work with Malaysia and Indonesia, our key regional neighbours, and our Pacific Island neighbours to help manage the movement of people. There are 1 million Rohingya currently in Bangladesh, and they need support. All right, our regional neighbours need support from a wealthy country like Australia, and we will step up and carry the can.
Right, thanks, Michelle. All right.
The Greens will end offshore detention. And mandatory detention and temporary visas, and offer a compassionate response to people who are fleeing circumstances that are not only beyond their control, but in increasing probability within our control. So in line with that, we know that there will be up to 1.2 billion refugees of the climate crisis forecast by 2050. It falls upon us to act preventatively to prevent that loss of home. We also know that, I've worked in the NGO sector for 20 years. I can tell you that the first victims of the climate crisis have long been lost. These communities are long suffering the experience of our inaction on climate. And the very least that we can do is offer a compassionate place for them. With specific reference to the Biloela family, of course, we will return them home.
All right, we now come to our last question for this evening. So I'd ask you all to speak to which piece of climate-focused legislation would be your number one priority should you be elected as the representative of Higgins, this very vibrant and wonderful constituency. And Sonya, we might start with you this time, thanks.
I feel a little bit like a broken record, but the number one piece of climate legislation we need is no new coal and gas projects. At a moment in time when the entire world is calling for less, both of the major parties are still ticking off more, and it's simply not a defensible position anymore. So as soon as the election, the day after the election, and should the Greens hold the balance of power, our terms of balance of power are a moratorium on all new coal and gas, while we legislate a path to net zero as soon as possible to meet our obligations. So that's number one.
If I am elected, then I would like to see us implement the Powering Australia plan. It's right there. There is a move to transition this country to a renewable energy future. We will hit 82% renewable energy by 2030. We're currently sitting at 33%. Now, we will also, EV vehicles will go from 2.5% now up to 89% in 2030. It is all there in that plan. It means taking this country forward, but taking it forward together. Right, linking the Hunter and Higgins together, Hunter and Gladstone. If we don't do this, it will forever be a barrier to raising our ambition. So we must do that. We must also invest in skills. We must invest in industrial capability, bring onshore manufacturing and sovereign capability back to Australia to make the products that we need. This is how we are going to modernise our economy. We are excellent miners. We are excellent at digging rare earths and iron ore out of the ground. But we need to now value add to those products, and that is what we intend to do. This is what the Labor agenda is all about. It is about pivoting this country from being a fossil fuel giant to a country that is an advanced modern economy, a bit like Germany, all right? A bit like Germany. And the final thing I would say is, I want to see women part of the economic narrative. Women are currently struggling. They've been hit with the double shift of the pandemic plus work. And right now, they are struggling, especially young women, young mothers. Why? Because childcare is absolutely unaffordable. I know something about this because I myself have paid the motherhood penalty. I know what it is like. It is infuriating. Sometimes I wish I was born a man. So I would say that I want to see this plan implemented, and it will only be implemented if we get rid of this useless government and we bring forth a team that is actually committed to decarbonising this country and seizing the opportunities that are ours for the taking. So we can do this, but you have a portal to step through on May 21. Think carefully. Do you want business as usual, which is basically incumbency without representation, or do you want something better? A party that will unify this nation and electrify the hearts and minds of its people.
There are a whole number of things climate-wise that I would want to see a government getting on with, and a whole lot of them aren't going to be legislative. They're going to be ministerial decisions, and they're going to be budgetary decisions, which for the federal government is a very, very big one, where they put the money. But legislatively, the thing that I want to see leading the way actually is reform to political donations, because it's the bottleneck that's stopping so many of the other things that could happen. You can go for one or two major things, but if we can get the dirty money out of it, that is the reason we've got to the position we are, the reason that we've had the slow movement, the slow adoption of the things that we need. If we can get that bottleneck out of the way, you're not getting just one piece of legislation, you're opening the door to this one and this one and this one and this one, continuing on and on and on throughout the rest of our history if we can do it right.
All right, thanks everyone. That concludes our Q&A from our candidates for tonight. I'm very shortly going to invite Will Howard up onto the stage to wrap things up, but I'd personally like to thank everyone for bearing with us as we adapted on the fly to a slightly unexpected turn of events. And I'd again just clarify on behalf of the organisers that there were significant attempts to accommodate Katie Allen prior to tonight. But thank you for being part of a lively discussion and for turning up and participating in tonight. And welcome Will back to the stage.
Okay, please stay just a little bit longer. We've just got 5, maybe 10 minutes tops to go. Thank you very much to our candidates. You'd probably like to get off the stage now if you like. It's up to you, but thank you for your presentation.
Before we're off the stage, I'd just quickly like to say on behalf of all the candidates, thank you to the Higgins CAN for putting this on and all the associated groups, all the people who've put work. I know that months and months have gone into this, so thank you very much.
Authorised by Lighter Footprints Incorporated, Q, Victoria.